delighted to welcome our next speaker, Lizzie Wynn. Lizzie has an MSc in Sustainability and Adaptation in the Built Environment and is currently undertaking PhD research at the Welsh School of Architecture. She is a Renew Wales mentor in Gwynedd, assisting community projects in becoming sustainable, and project manager at Incredible Edible Perthadog. She is a visiting lecturer and short course leader at the Centre for Alternative Technology, otherwise known as CAT, in Wales 2015 to 2020, and was a workshop leader when we were down at Clayfest there in 2018. Lizzie, welcome to Clayfest, and we are all delighted to hear your presentation today.
Thank you. I should say I'm speaking from Wales, so I should say Bore da pawb. Good morning, everyone. So I'm just going to share my screen now. Okay, can you see that, Tom?
Yeah, we can see that. That's great. Go ahead.
Thank you. So good morning. So I've been on a journey for about 25 years exploring sustainable building materials, and I've ended up in waste at the moment. The journey began with the realization that many standard materials used within our homes were unhealthy and sustainable. A tiny baby, and I was converting a barn. I wanted the internal air to be healthy and added materials to be all natural. The solution for me at the time was a green oak frame within the old barn, and it used cellulose insulation. The finishes included organic paints, but though interestingly enough, all these decisions and the labour costs and the materials involved, it meant that eventually I couldn't afford to keep my barn as my home, even though at the time I always thought I was doing it forever. And I thought a home for life. So I sold up and I moved on. I continued to use natural and sustainable materials at every opportunity in subsequent refurbishments that I did. But something changed for me when I was living on an extremely low income. And this became probably the most creative period of my life as a result. I was building our farmhouse in Spain, and I was really inspired by the local traditional Andalusian architecture, where materials had come from the immediate vicinity. And as the landscape changed, so did the materials. Nothing new there really, but it was my time of really becoming very aware of this and appreciating it. The roofs used river cane and low lying. This change to slates and stone. Poverty and need really drove these material choices, whereas labour time did not, which leads to resourcefulness and exploration with materials close by. This led to my own choices changing and to rethink design and reassess structures using local and sustainable materials. It's not a big change, but unconventional materials now featured more, such as waste. It increased the opportunity for ethical and responsible construction with the added bonus of cleaning the surrounding environment. A long period of experimentation followed, which led to teaching others and constructing for others. And in the beginning, it felt rather uncomfortable using plastic and tires, and at times it still is. But compromises, though hard, can still be useful. Using up materials from this messy Anthropocene era means that something began to feel intrinsically balanced by mixing these materials with masses of earth in a way that does not contaminate either material or the users of the spaces, means materials can be reused over and over again safely. And hopefully this is not the final solution for these materials. It's more like storage, which aligns very well to cradle principles, and this is a key element. Returning to Wales again, we'd kept the field below the barn and the straw bale llama stable. And over the years, this has gradually evolved when visiting Wales into a camping barn. In 2016, we moved back and made a basic home in it, and gradually introducing more earthen materials. Plastic is made at an unsustainable rate. It's creating a huge issue now and will continue to do so for future generations. In the meantime, production continues to increase and profits continue to be made. It's present in every place on our planet, inhabited by humans or not. It is available everywhere as a resource. It is created from virgin materials, new stuff for construction every day. It's in our clothing fibers, our buttons, our zips, phones, cars, around our food, within our food and our bodies, and it's discarded at an increasing rate. So the interest in Gaza came about while researching international non-governmental solutions for shelter. And I became interested in finding some sustainable local solutions. This is the title, Gaza Reconstruction, Assessing Feasibility of Sustainable, Local and Recycled Materials for Transitional Housing Solutions. Gaza is still looking a lot like this in places. There's still a lot of reconstruction to be done. And people are incredibly resourceful and creative there, making the most of any shelter. So the main hypothesis was that PET bottle building can be a sustainable and acceptable local solution in the Gaza Strip for transitional housing, meaning PET bottles stuffed with single waste plastics. So why consider them in Gaza? Well, there was a blockade, so getting materials in was really difficult. And concrete was the standard, but not very sustainable. The population is still increasing dramatically. Lots more materials are being needed for new houses that would have been needed anyway, as well as the reconstruction process. There's massive unemployment, so people do have time, and there's lots of people still displaced. So the imported materials are expensive and in short supply, as well as unsustainable. And the shelter solutions presented by international non-governmental organizations, that they're not always climate appropriate, sustainable or replicable. And there's massive problems with water quality, so a lot of PET bottles are brought in. So the PET bottle appeared in the 1970s, and very, very quickly it won over the market on glass. It's produced from petrochemicals from the start. The demand is going up massively. This example, it's up almost 400% over 9 years in India, and these in Japan and Brazil which are similar increases. The recycling has only gone up a little bit, 10 to 33%. And there aren't very many recycling facilities in Gaza. First, I studied the vernacular architecture in Gaza and found that the traditional courtyard had evolved into partially into a version in the more rural setting with mud, but that wasn't, there's very little land, so not everyone has the opportunity to live on the land, and they're not viewed very well. The mud buildings, they're considered not the buildings that people would like to live in. So the people seem to want concrete buildings, and the traditional layout of the building is replicated in the apartment buildings. And quite often they're 5 floors and they belong to one family, and there's lots of different families living on the different levels. So this shelter that I was part of constructing as an example at CAT during my master's, it was very clever and interesting as a design, but wood wasn't readily available in Gaza. So it wasn't possible to alter this or increase the building as a transitional housing into a bigger house. I looked at the generation of waste in Gaza and found that there was up to 1,800 tonnes of waste generated every day, 8 to 16% of this being plastic, which equated to 61 to 121 tonnes of plastic per day. 3% of that was recycled, but the PET bottles weren't really part of that because they were so low in value. And the forecast rates are that Gaza will have 589 tonnes of plastic waste per day by 2040. So with 14,000 bottles and cob, this example is sand-filled bottles, you can actually build a 2-bedroom building. This example in Honduras has been built with 7,800 bottles and is quite similar to the size of a transitional building. And just to clarify, transitional is a step further than the emergency housing. So it's the next stage before moving towards a permanent house. I just got a pop. Is everything okay? I hope my connection's okay.
Yeah, you're fine, Lizzie. Yeah, you're fine, Lizzie. It's all right.
Thank you. So in terms of thermal comfort, the plastic bottle house seems to be quite equivalent.
It stopped sharing your screen now. You're going to have to click that again. The pop was just a message you got sent, I think, is all. I just want to share your screen again. Get you back on.
How's that?
Perfect. All right.
Okay, so in terms of thermal comfort, the plastic bottle house tends to be equivalent to a brick house, and this is using a cement mortar for this example. And it was quite interesting that the Mansour and Ali research found that the bottles performed best when empty. And Tarfnor looked at the sound reduction index, found it was less than a concrete block, but again, it's not using cob yet in these examples. So in terms of strength, they are found to be suitable for constructing single-storey buildings, although 2-storey buildings have now started to appear in Nigeria. It was really important to find out about acceptability in Gaza with regard to whether people would use this as a shelter type, because there's no point building a shelter that nobody will actually enter and use. So in the first survey, it was quite consistent that people were open to it as short-term solutions, and then in a more prolonged period, they're also open to it. And this survey changed a lot in other at the bottom, which the other was generally that people would leave Gaza, but that's not an easy thing to do either. The second survey looked at the styles of housing, and pictures were presented to people. Most participants were architects and engineers or students in these. And 3/4 of them, in both cases roughly, were open to considering living in a bottle building for a short period and a permanent one. These are some of the styles that were presented. These are the most popular solutions. And they weren't all bottle buildings that were presented, because I was looking to see what styles were acceptable. But the top 2 were bottle buildings. And the third one down is an earthship building. And the one at the bottom is a stone and mud mortar building. But equally, a bottle building could be built like that. So in terms of quantities of bottles, I determined that there would be about 4.49 million bottles per week available, which equated to 576 house walls of the size of the Honduras house of 7,800 bottles, or almost 30,000 houses per year. So to conclude, there are enough bottles to build transitional solutions and potentially larger houses if those bottles were available for building, and they're not being recycled at present, not yet. Residents were willing to try PET bottle homes. The material is strong. It is sustainable because it's using up something that's already there, and it is climate appropriate. The infrastructure is in place, but says insufficient at the moment for PET. People like that a mix of materials increase their preparedness for disaster and conflict, and a pilot building is needed next. So given how acceptable it became, you'd think, why aren't more people doing this, perhaps? But there isn't a lot of information out there about how to do it. People are not sure of the strength and quality of the build. There's stigma around using rubbish in the home, but when you present a building, people are very open to it, it seems. It's quite a labour-intensive process because there's cob. The bottles themselves take a lot of filling, but people are willing to fill them. And it's hard to know what resources are out there, how many bottles you could get if you did want to do this, for example. Apparently, a lot of people are very interested. The EcoBricks UK group, which is the PET bottle stuffed with single-waste plastic, went up from 28,000, or went from nothing in March 2018 up to, I checked yesterday, it was up at 40,680 members now. So since the 2018 research, the plastic issue is more widespread and much better understood. The Blue Planet series came out at the time I was doing the research, and the interest and awareness went up a lot at that time. Gaza is much more in the news, and it's getting really bad with COVID at the moment as well. The little pilot build at Clayfest is at the top right there, and that was a fun little build to do with a whole mix of materials, actually, but some bottles. And then at present, this building on the right is under construction at Incredible Edible Porthmadog, using Welsh Government funding to build with landfill waste. This is the location of the project in Northwest Wales. And the building's a shed, sort of a tea making hub for the gardeners, and it's within that red rectangle. It's the sort of middle to bottom left of the image there, which forms part of the edible corridor, which goes past a primary school, a supported living home, Tesco, doctor's surgery, and it actually starts to go up in the north as well now. So the building's roughly in the middle now. So the building's built with a cob mortar to enable it to be reused again, all of the materials. The specification for the PET bottle brick on EcoBricks is 330 grams per litre, which is quite a dense brick. But this is the intention of this is to sequester massive amounts of plastic within it, and it makes it really strong for making small furniture, which is used with the bottle upright, whereas the building, the bottles are on the side, so they're a stronger shape.
Lizzie,
which is why.
Just to say that,
yes?
that it's three minutes to go, just to let you know.
Okay, I'll speed up. But the finding that the empty bottles have a compressive strength similar to, well, better than the filled bottles in one test was quite interesting. So I've kind of used that to kind of work on a hypotheses about using different densities of EcoBricks, PET bottle bricks. It is likely that different U values will emerge, that the less dense bricks may perform better with cob and achieve a U value that will meet UK building requirements. And so the left wall in this picture is built with the EcoBrick standard of above 0.33 tons per meter cube, and the right wall is between 0.2 to 0.3 tons per meters cube. So that's 200 to 332 grams per litre bottle. The foundations are a mix of these two illustrations with a rubble trench and then tyres above, mostly filled with rubble, some earth. And the bottles are laid flat within a thick cob mix, and each bottle is levelled with a spirit level. The labour force for the build is voluntary mostly, and has involved all ages and genders. And I wanted to mention Teresa here, who has used the cob making to recover from a leg operation and has stomped most of that cob by herself. This was during lockdown. And this was placing the final bottle here. So at this point, we'd used 1,250 bottles, 415 kilos of single-use plastic, which was more than that because we made a cob bench within it. So it was at nearly half a ton of used plastic, which and that was about 15.5 tons of subsoil. The project was halted recently for 5 months because suddenly people decided that we needed to apply for formal planning permission. So that's happening at the moment. But we did manage to get in and complete the roof recently and get a membrane on it, a rubber membrane, EDPM, and get it watertight, which is a relief to have it like that for the winter. And I imagine that we'll continue in the spring. So just to conclude now, so the cob is a cob with plastics appears to be a viable construction solution and does not contaminate either material. It could increase the insulation in cob walls and potentially increase the use of cob within construction. All materials can be reused. Use in construction is one solution for single-use plastics. The flow of plastic definitely needs to be slowed and stopped. Many solutions will need to evolve for plastic reuse if humans want a cleaner and healthier planet to reside on. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Lizzie, for that talk. We have a cluster of speakers this morning who are going to be talking about materials and combinations of materials with earth for contemporary construction. And I think at the end of that, we're going to have a Q&A session where Lizzie will join us with the other two speakers, and we'll debate some of those issues before breaking for lunch. And so there's been quite lively discussion on the chat. We'll pick out some of those questions to take with our speaker then. So thank you very much, Lizzie, and we'll see you again in a wee while.